There's been some maybe unexpected fallout from the murder of Charlie Kirk last week, and that is including some people who have actually lost their jobs in response to comments they made. MSNBC political analyst Matthew Dowd lost his job shortly after he made comments about the assassination. His employer said that he was wrong, that he was inciting, and that his comments were hateful.
Also inappropriate, insensitive, and unacceptable. So there was a staff member at the University of Mississippi who was fired after sharing insensitive comments, according to the school's chancellor. A comic book writer lost her job because of social media posts, as did other educators in Mississippi and Tennessee. A Carolina Panthers public relations official lost their job. Right? I mean, it's a question of how far do First Amendment rights go?
Yeah, and the answer to that is it doesn't. Your employer in most states, including Utah, can fire you for just about anything, including exercising your First Amendment rights if they don't like what you say. So the First Amendment is great. You can say what you want, but an employer doesn't have to keep you on their staff if you're violating it. So, for example, there wouldn't necessarily be a criminal prosecution for a First Amendment violation or some level of censorship. But your employer isn't bound by that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
right.
So if I have an employee who's suddenly posting about some hateful rhetoric toward a particular group, ethnic group or whatever, I can say, sorry, we don't want you here. Post whatever you want. I can't stop you, but I can stop you from coming into my office from now on.
So how does that play into being an at-will state? So Utah's an at-will employment state, right? So my understanding is you can be let go at any time for any reason or no reason at all.
Yes, and Utah is maybe not particularly unusual about that, but yes, Utah, they can say, I mean, you can fire an employee because their socks don't match one day. And it's terrible, but Utah takes at will to an entirely new level. Now, some employers, including government employers, have what's called merit system, where you have some level of protection. Teachers have you become tenured, and then you have some level of protection. Or if you have an employment contract, you can be fired if you violate the terms of the contract. But otherwise, like you say, we're at will here in Utah, and even government employees in some of these other groups that I'm talking about often have a probationary period where you can be terminated for any reason at all.
Well, Utah law newly changed, I think either this last legislative session or the one before, changed even tenure. So people with tenure can also be let go now. It's interesting, Ray. And one of the articles that I looked at today for the Utah Policy Newsletter, this one is from Reuters, and this one says, "Mourn Charlie Kirk properly or else." And then the subhead really is saying, look, they're saying you have to. You can expect that we will either sue you into oblivion or we're going to get you fired from your job, right? We're going to dox your house. I mean, there are things where people are online scouring for information for people who are not, quote unquote, supportive enough of Charlie Kirk's passing.
Yeah, and so it would seem to me that if you want to, why chime in at all? I mean, and if you do chime in, recognize that there are certain things you might be doing that are at will. There may be certain organizations you're involved in, your employer, your marriage. I mean, there are certain things you might be doing where the other party says, sorry, I don't want to be associated with you anymore.
So one one U.S. lawmaker said that anyone who, quote, ran their mouth with their smart aleck hatred celebrating the murder of that beautiful young man needs to be banned from all platforms forever. So he's one that wants to ban people from accessing social media for the rest of their lives, which you just create another profile. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lawmaker. And then other ones are proposing that Kirk's critics be deported or sued into penury, right, which I assume means poverty.
Right, yes.
That's a fancy British word. Thanks so much. It's really interesting to me to see how much this is going on, right? It's going after, I think I said the last I saw was there were like 40,000 names on a list of people that they're going after for retribution.
Yeah, and what I see some of these people who are posting, and it makes me cringe because it'll start with, it's really horrible what happened to Charlie Kirk, but here's what he did. In other words, It's not that. It wasn't that horrible. Well, I don't know how you can put any spin on a murder other than it was.
It's so sad.
The worst thing you could. It's terrible. And so, you don't agree with some of his comments. Did that contribute?
Well, but
is that the fault of him?
Right, but is that now saying that you can't disagree with anybody now? And we do have a lawmaker who has said, this is another Washington lawmaker, I think he's from Oklahoma, saying it's not a crime to disagree with somebody's opinion. It's not a crime to disagree with that. But if you are at risk of losing your job, if you disagree publicly, right, you can say, I'm so sad, and while I didn't always agree, I understand that. I get that. I understand that. But
they're doing more than that. They're highlighting what he said in a way that makes it appear
but
that
sometimes they're just quoting his own comments back, and that's where you get to, for my questions, right, for First Amendment. I think it has a real chilling effect on people saying, I can't share now because I'm at risk of losing my job. And then does that make the echo chamber even worse?
Right. The thing is, you don't have a right to do your job. You know what I mean? That's what at will's about. So you do have a right to not go to prison or to jail, and so you wouldn't be jailed for your First Amendment comments unless they're slanderous or something like that. But your job, I mean, your employer is like, hey, I can't afford to have you work for me anymore because of comments you made that are going to affect my business. I don't want you here anymore. Even MSNBC saying, we just don't need the grief, Matthew Dowd. And he almost certainly had an employment contract, but there may be something in that says if you bring disparagement or public contempt to the network, we can terminate you, and they may feel like he crossed that line.
Yeah, it's just, for me, it's an interesting discussion on the limits of the First Amendment. And I will say it's not limited to this Charlie Kirk situation. There have been, of course, you've seen this over and over and over with the Israel-Gaza situation. I think we see it with young people who are graduating from college. Their advice to make sure your social media content has been scoured so that your potential employer is not seeing you partying it up, right, holding a drink in your hand and looking like you're inebriated, right, intoxicated. That's one of the issues too. So we know employers go look at social media right now. We know that people have lost their jobs for taking a stance on the Israel-Gaza conflict, right? So there's different ways where this can show up.
Yeah, and then we're seeing a Fox News reporter, Brian Kilmeade, making a comment that the homeless people should be executed. I don't even know what context you would say that, but
we're going to talk about that in a coming up segment. But yeah, right? Lethal injection.
Yeah, what's his employer going to do as a response to that? That's another example, I guess.
They did not fire him. I will say that.
Well,
so look, again, it's an ongoing conversation about First Amendment, and I'll say, just looking at the peace building comments and looking at these organizations and trying to get people to ratchet down the heat, maybe sometimes you don't post it.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you just don't post it.
Right. I mean, or I tell people this before you make a post like that, write it, but before you post it, go take a walk.
12 hours.
Wait a couple of hours. Yeah. Run it by a friend. I sometimes do that with my wife when I'm angry at somebody. I'm like, honey, will you just read this before I hit
Yeah,
send?
Exactly.
And she will.
I remember in my early blogging days, it was super funny because there was this meme, this cartoon that went around that said, "No, honey, I can't come to bed. Someone on the internet is wrong." Right?
Right. Yes.
You cannot spend your time doing that. You just can't. Sometimes you just have to let it go.
And we've all hit send, and
we regret.
we hadn't done that or given a comment.
Recall.
Right? Yes. No timeouts.